defense of the nation.
Good afternoon and welcome to World News on Psalm TV, the pulse of the nation. I am Abraham Manigura. You can follow us on Facebook at Psalm TV and on YouTube at Psalm TV Live. Here are the major headlines. Myanmar military limiting aid in earthquake areas, UN says. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni visits Cuba. China demands compensation from Taiwan after collision of Navy ship and trawler. Now, the news in full. Myanmar's military is limiting critically needed humanitarian aid for earthquake victims in areas where it sees oppositions to its rule. The United Nations Human Rights Office said on Friday. The UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights also said it was investigating 53 reported attacks by the junta against its opponent since the earthquake struck on March 28th, including airstrikes of which 16 came after a ceasefire on April 2. On Friday, the office was made aware of further 8 attacks which it was looking into itself. A spokesperson from Myanmar's ruling junta did not respond to calls from Reuters seeking comments. The humanitarian situation in earthquake areas, especially those out of the military's control, was catastrophic. UN Rights Office spokesperson Lavina Shamdasani told reporters in Geneva. The 7.7 magnitude quake, one of the strongest to reach Myanmar in a century, jolted areas home to 28 million people, toppling buildings, flattening communities, and leaving many without food, water, and shelter. Myanmar's junta says the death toll has risen to more than 3,100. Limitations of aid is part of the strategy to prevent aid getting to the population it sees as not supporting its seizure of power back in 2021, says James Rodde-Eber, head of OHCHR's Myanmar team. Speaking via video link from Bangkok, the need for aid was particularly urgent in Myanmar's Sagaing region and time of working against the humanitarian agencies to help those in need, he added. Air strikes are alarming, shocking, and need to stop straight away. The focus needs to be on humanitarian recovery, Shamdasani said. The government on Stage 1 MRTV late on Wednesday announced a 20-day unilateral ceasefire effective immediately to support post-trade rehabilitation, but warned it will respond accordingly if rebels launch attacks. Millions of people have been affected by Myanmar's widening civil war triggered by the coup that ousted the government of Nobel Peace Laureate Aung San Suu Kyi. It has decimated the mainly agrarian economy, driven more than 3.5 million people from their homes, and crippled essential services such as healthcare. United States President Donald Trump remains committed to NATO's Article 5 on mutual defense and will be present at a NATO summit in The Hague in June. Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski told reporters in Brussels on Friday. Trump's security policies have undermined all the certainties in Europe that the United States would come to its aid if it was attacked, leading some to question Washington's commitment to the principle of mutual defense. However, at the meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Brussels, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told allies on Thursday that Washington remained committed to the alliance, but expected them to spend far more on defense and would give them some time to do so. Asked at the summit whether he believed that the U.S. remained committed to defending NATO territory, Sikorski replied yes. President Trump confirmed it to the leaders. It is still valid, and from what we hear, President Trump will be present at the summit in The Hague, he added. China has demanded that Taiwan compensate Chinese fishermen for losses after a Taiwanese Navy landing ship and a Chinese fishing boat collided outside restricted waters last week. The Taiwanese vessel, the Chang'o, collided with the Chinese trawler Min Lingyu 61756 early on March 27, shortly after midnight, around 45 nautical miles off Taiwan's Taochung port, which sits on the Taiwan Strait and 9 nautical miles outside of the restricted water. Taiwanese Navy said last week the responsibility for the accident lies entirely with the Taiwan ship, but the Taiwan ship has a bad attitude and evaded responsibility after hitting the fishing boat, Zhou Fenglen, spokesman for the China's Taiwan Affairs Office, said in a statement sent to Reuters on Friday. Zhou said China's preliminary investigation showed that the Chinese trawler was anchored with its automatic identification system signal and warning lights turned on. It was hit by the Taiwanese ship that did not display its AIS signal or warning lights, Zhou said. Taiwan's Navy responded to the demand for compensation, said an investigation led by Taiwan's Coast Guard was ongoing, and that after the probe, follow-up matters will be handled in accordance with the cross-strait consultation mechanism and relevant procedures. It did not elaborate. The Taiwan Strait is the site of daily Chinese and Taiwanese military activities, though both sides normally maintain a respectful distance, and they have seen no exchanges of fire for decades. China, which claims democratically governed Taiwan as its own territory, has ramped up its military drills around the island in recent years. The Chinese military staged 2 days of war games around Taiwan this week, in which it held long-range live fire drills in the East China Sea. Beijing said the exercise were a response to what it views as provocations from Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te, who won an election last year and whom Beijing as a separatist. A Kenyan court has ruled that Facebook parent company Meta can be sued in the East African country over its alleged role in promoting content that led to ethnic violence in neighboring Ethiopia. A plaintiff in the case said the landmark case, which stems from alleged hate speech on the platform during the 2020-2022 civil war in northern Ethiopia's Tigray region, will have implications of how Meta works with content moderators globally. The company has argued that local courts do not have the power to hear cases against it where it is not registered as a company. Kenya Cycle rejected the argument in its ruling on Thursday, said the Katiba Institute, which is the plaintiff in the case, alongside 2 Ethiopian researchers. The court here has refused to shy away from determining an important global matter, recognizing that homegrown issues must be addressed directly in our courts, said Nora Bagati, the Institute's executive director. The Meta spokesperson did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The plaintiffs have alleged that Facebook recommendation systems amplify violent posts in Ethiopia during the Tigray War. Plaintiff Abraham Megreg alleged that his father, Megreg Amari, was killed in 2021 following threatening posts on Facebook. Fishe Tekle, an Amnesty International researcher, says he faced online aid for human rights work in Ethiopia. They are demanding that Meta create a restitution funds for victims of hate and violence and alter Facebook algorithm to stop promoting hate speech. Meta has previously said it's invested heavily in content moderation and removed hateful content from the platform. The case is the third to be brought against Meta in Kenya, where the company also faces lawsuits from content moderators employed by a local contractor who said they faced poor working conditions and were fired for trying to organize a union. Meta has responded that it requires partners to provide industry-leading conditions. The company, which had invested billions and hired thousands of content moderators globally, over the years to police sensitive content, in January scrapped the U.S. fact-checking program. It also said at the time that to stop proactively scanning for hate speech and other types of rule-breaking, reviewing such posts only in response to user reports. Rwandan-backed M23 rebels in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo have withdrawn from the strategic town of Walikale, describing the move as a goodwill gesture ahead of planned peace talks with government next week. M23 has seized Eastern Congo's two largest cities in a swift advance since January that resulted in thousands of deaths and forced hundreds of thousands more from their homes. The fighting has raised fears of a wider regional war as Congo's neighbors Uganda and Burundi also have troops in the region. Congo's government and M23 plan to hold their first direct talks in Doha on April 9. Sources from both camps told Reuters this week. Situated along a road linking four eastern Congo provinces, Walikale is an area rich in minerals, including tin. M23 pledged to withdraw from Walikale last month, but initially failed to do so, accusing the Congolese army of going back on its own commitments and not withdrawing attack drones. Two residents and a local official confirmed to Reuters this week that they had led the town. Army spokesperson Sylvia Ekenge told Reuters on Friday that Congolese troops were there, confirming M23 soldiers had left. If the forces of the Kinshasa regime continues their provocations or attacks on civilians in the liberated area and on our position, this gesture of goodwill will automatically be cancelled and will eliminate the threat as its source. Lawrence Kunyaka, the spokesperson for the Rebel Alliance that includes M23, said in a statement on X on Thursday. Doctors Without Borders said this week that civilians, along with his own teams, have been trapped by the violence in Walikale and that essential medical supplies will soon run out there. United Nations and Western governments in Rwanda has provided arms and troops to the ethnic Tutsi-led M23. Rwanda has denied backing M23 and says its military has acted in self-defense against Congo's army and a militia founded by perpetrators of the 1994 genocide. Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni arrived in neighboring South Sudan on Thursday in the highest-level mission there since clashes and the detention of the vice president triggered regional fears of a return to civil war. Museveni was met at the airport by South Sudan's President Salva Kiir, whose administration has accused first Vice President Riek Machar of stoking rebellion and put him under house arrest. The Ugandan leader, whose military was invited into South Sudan last month to help secure the capital, did not refer directly to the crisis in public remarks at the airport in Juba. The visit follows mediation missions by the African Union and an East African regional body this week aimed at de-escalating the crisis. Museveni told reporters he will hold talks aimed at strengthening bilateral relations and enhancing cooperation between our two nations. Kiir said the two leaders will discuss current political developments in the country. The standoff between Kiir and Machar, who led opposing forces in the 2013 to 2018 civil war that killed hundreds of thousands, has led the United Nations to warn that the world young nation could be on the brink of all-out conflict along ethnic lines. Uganda backed Kiir's forces during the civil war and sent troops last month amid fighting between South Sudan's military and an ethnic Nuer militia in Upper Nile states in the northeast. Machar's mostly Nuer forces were allied with the White Army militia during the civil war, but his party denies government accusation of ongoing links. Uganda's military chief Muhoozi Kainerugaba, who is also Museveni's son, said on Thursday he has ordered Ugandan forces to stop attacking the White Army so long as it ceases offensive against Ugandan troops. Machar's party said the Ugandan intervention is a violation of South Sudan's arms embargo. Analysts say Craig 73 appears to be attempting to shore up its position amid discontent within his own political camp and speculations about his succession plan. European foreign ministers at a NATO meeting blamed Russia on Friday for thwarting a U.S. push for peace in Ukraine and called for firm pressure on Moscow to agree to a ceasefire, and declared to persuade the Trump administration to take a harder line. U.S. President Donald Trump, who has promised to bring back a quick end to the 3-year-old war, has for weeks said he believes Russia Vladimir Putin is committed to peace. Sources have told Reuters that the White House has grown wary of Putin's intentions in recent days, although Trump continues to signal publicly his belief that Putin wants to end the war. Moscow rejected a U.S. proposal in March for a full 30-day ceasefire after Ukraine said it would agree. The warring sides then agreed to a limited pause in attacks on each other's energy infrastructure, which both accused the other of violating. Moscow was an answer to the United States, which had worked very hard to come up with a mediation efforts and a ceasefire proposal. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot said on Friday ahead of the second day of a meeting of NATO foreign ministers. It could accept a ceasefire now. It continues to bombard Ukraine, its civilian population, its energy supplies. We know what you're doing, Lamy said. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said Putin's talks of negotiation was nothing but empty promises, and the Russian leader was playing for time by raising ever new demands. The foreign ministers of Canada and Estonia were among those calling for timelines for Russia to accept a ceasefire. Washington says it's still in contact with both sides and pushing for a truce. A senior State Department officer said late on Thursday that the first day of the NATO talks, there were overwhelming support for Ukraine for ending the war, for President Trump's effort to conclude the war, but also recognized that Russia needs to do more in this context. The official said there was not necessarily a consensus on the timeline for increasing pressure on Russia, but there was a recognition that the sooner the better. There was a consensus that Russia needs to do more, that Russia should agree to a ceasefire. I take that again. A senior NATO diplomat said he is among Europeans and they were not yet involved in negotiations whose outcome will determine the security situation in Europe for the next decade. The director of the U.S. National Security Agency was fired on Thursday, the Washington Post reported, citing two current and one former U.S. officials. Timothy Hague, who is also head of the U.S. Cyber Command, was dismissed along with his deputy at the NSA, Wendy Noble. The newspaper said Noble was reassigned to a job within the Pentagon Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. The newspaper said the NSA is part of the U.S. Defense Department. The current and former officials cited by the Washington Post said they did not know the reason for Hague's dismissal or Noble's reassignments. U.S. Cyber Command Deputy William Hartman was named acting NSA director, and Sheila Thomas, who was executive director at the NSA, was named acting deputy, the newspaper said. The Pentagon and the White House did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Democrat Jim Ames, a ranking member of the House of Representatives Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and Senator Mark Warner, the Democratic Vice Chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, condemned Hague's firing. It is astonishing that President Trump, who fired the non-partisan, experienced leader of the NSA, whilst failing to hold any member of his team accountable for leaking classified information on a commercial messaging app, even as he apparently takes staffing direction on national security from a discredited conspiracy theorist in the Oval Office. Warner wrote in a post on X. Republican President Donald Trump, since taking office on January 20, has fired multiple top officials at U.S. agencies and installed loyalists. Elon Musk, who is leading the Trump administration effort to cut and streamline the federal government's workforce, visited the National Security Agency last month to meet Hague. Yeah, NSA is one of the United States' premier intelligence agency and uses top-tier specialized technology and systems to collect and analyze intelligence. U.S. Cyber Command carries out both offensive and defensive operations and monitors the network of the Department of Defense. Trump's team advising against call with Putin until agrees to full ceasefire. President Trump's departed the White House. The Trump's inner circle is advising him against a call with Vladimir Putin until the Russian president commits to a full ceasefire with Ukraine. NBC News report on Thursday citing administration officials. The report added that the official cautioned that Trump would decide he wants to talk to Putin suddenly. Trump told NBC News on Sunday he planned to talk to Putin this week. That's all for World News for today. I am Abraham Minor Judah, and thanks for watching.